Hello everyone, it's Melanie here with Vintage Hill Studio. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to be making this watercolor card on an embossed background. I used the Mosaic Butterfly Embossing folder by Darice. You can see the beautiful detail here. It looks a little bit like stained glass. Canson XL watercolor paper that's 4 1/4 by 5 3/4 inch length. I'll slip that right into my embossing folder and run that through my Sizzix Texture Boutique. This will emboss the watercolor paper, giving us these wonderful channels to work within for our watercolor. By using an embossing folder like this, you can see you have these raised areas and depressed areas. I'll be taping this down with some blue painter's tape, and I run that across the oils on my hands so that when I lift it off of my paper after I'm through with my watercoloring, it will not tear the paper. So I'm just going to adhere that down. I'm using some simple watercolors, brushes, and a little cup of water, paper towels. That's my supplies. So off camera, I've mixed up the colors that I want to use on this card, and I start by applying water into each of the areas. I'll just start with this poppy and show you how I accomplish this, and then I will speed up for the rest of the video so you don't have to sit through this whole thing. It takes a little while, but it's really rewarding. I think you would love this process. So by staying within those embossed lines, you can see the sheen from the water here. When I apply my watercolor to these areas, it's going to bloom, which means spread out. So I'll take a little bit of my color that I wanted on my poppies and apply it. So this is wet on wet watercolor. I'm not an expert at watercolor, but it's so much fun. I think you should give it a try. And there are plenty of other tutorials on YouTube that show you how to use watercolor for your cards. So you can see just by dabbing off a little bit of the paint and still working in that wet on wet technique, you get a shading as well as highlighting all in one step. And you can continue to come back after these pieces are dried and add more depth of color and keep working it until you maintain the color that you want to see in your finished product. So here I'm being very careful to go around the stamens of the poppy, because later on you'll see where those will be black. So by just applying a little bit more water, it moves the color out automatically for you. Now, as I've watched other people who are more expert at watercoloring, they will tell you to leave this alone and come back to it after it's dry, which happens relatively quickly because watercolor dries so fast. Now I wanted to go about coloring in these raised edges of my embossed image, so I'm just going around those lightly with a little bit of paint on my brush. Because as you'll see as we progress in this video, I'm going to entirely watercolor this whole image. And so I don't want the raised white on the edges of all of my images to show. Again, right here, adding a little more depth with some shading. And then using a little bit of water in my brush to work that out, to smooth it just a bit. You can go through any of your embossing folders and see which ones you think would make a good fit for a watercolor technique. There's so many options out there. I'm sure you will not run out of resources to choose from. So as we go on along here, I'm going to move on to the butterflies. And I'm going to speed this up quite a bit, so I'll put on some music for you as we go through this process. which is 5 1/4 by 6 3/4 with my inside sentiment stamp on the back. And of course I like to finish my envelopes with a stamp on the front and the back and line the inside as well. If you'd like to see how I line my envelopes, visit my YouTube channel and check out some of those videos there. I think this was a really fun card to make. I hope you'll get inspired to give it a try and come back and see me sometime. Happy crafting, everyone!